And now, ladies and gentlemen, I've discussed for the last few videos now about some of the more underrated characters in the Dark Souls series, as well as their OSTs actually being rather beautiful and very, very gothic in their own respects. But we also come to what is undoubtedly one of the most underrated, of them all, which is kind of ironic because if you know anything at all about the story of Dark Souls 3, you will know that it was in part the twin princes, Lorian and Lothric, who were responsible for all the events that happened in this game, because it was Lothric who was basically elected, if you will, just for being decorated as the last hope of his line. It was he who was meant to take the mantle as Lord of Cinder, and yet he rejected it, mostly because he saw the what happened to his brother Lorian, and both decided that they were going to remain in their chambers, specifically just to watch the world around wither and the flame to end for good, which is why the bell tolls and we see Aldrich, Yorm, and the Abyss Watchers rise from their graves, and how even the Unkindled begin to rise as well. And basically, you get to what is undoubtedly basically the very top of Lothric Castle, and you encounter the Twin Princes. And it's also one of the best double takes this game throws you, because Dark Souls 3 throws so many twists and turns with who you're fighting, the context of who or even what you're fighting, and then it gives us this super badass cutscenes for both Lorian. Now, it's not the first time we've ever seen two cutscenes in a boss fight before, but this one just sort of almost does it better than most. Maybe even better than Ludwig, but this is just what happens when you fight. I'm sort of wanted to do this as fast as I can because, let's just see. This is how the fight begins. This is how they introduce Lothric and Lorian. Basically, the two you are told to save, their souls from the plight of the flame ending.
Oh dear. Another dogged contender. Welcome, unkindled one, purloiner of cinders. Mind you, the mantle of Lord interests me none. The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords, let it all fade into nothing. You've done quite enough. Now have your rest.
Lorian emerges with his sword scorched from fighting I think it's meant to be the Demon Prince is the explanation for why his sword is scorched, but then the fight begins so immediately because Lorian has an entirely new ability in which he teleports, because in game he literally fights with two broken legs, and unlike King Vendrick, who just wallows around, just trailing his sword on the ground, Lorian can fight with two broken legs, with the sort of speed and power almost unmatched. And this is what it sounds like with his brother Lothric watching on. Now, technically, really, if you get to this part, is when the second stage begins, because I don't want to get like super heavy for like the mechanics of this fight, but basically Lorian has such a huge variety of moves, from slashing his sword to thrusting it to shooting the bolts of fire all over the ground, to this one attack where he can even stand up and slam you with his sword, and even conjuring up light to basically light up the entire ground and do damage. Lorian's like moveset indicate that he may be crippled, but he was such the perfect candidate for receiving the mantle of the Lord of Cinder, and yet it was bestowed to his brother, and it's even fantastic that technically through how they decide to go about trying to keep like the flame alight, or just watch it die with them in some way. They are conjoined souls in some roundabout way. So we talked before about how you're introduced to Lorian and Lothric, and then you're introduced to how Lothric gets into this fight. So as soon as you reduce Lorian's health to 0 is what happens next.
Dear brother, I'm on my way. My brother, unyielding sword of Lothric's prince. Rise if you would, for that is our curse.
It's such an absolutely badass pose, this, with Lorian arising almost stronger than ever before, because one thing that Lothric absolutely does is that he now has an entire array of magic and miracles by his side, and it's like the worst part about trying to fight two bosses at once, because you're having to contend with two very separate movesets, but don't think that just because you can damage both of them now at the same time, it makes the fight any easier, because it just becomes more frantic and far easier to make a mistake. And it even raises the stakes higher again, because now you've actually got Lothric in the fight. Now this is where you can slay a Lord of Cinder. just sort of ends as it should do, with basically you've now done what could only be considered as almost the impossible. You've completely slain what is the final Lord of Cinder, and it means that you can now take the mantle as the true heir of the flame. And I do want to end it by stating this is basically what Lothric says before the fight ends, or when you've finished killing them both. Because it's chilling, but it says it's a lot for words still. The way it ends.
My words, as you want.
And yes, I know technically like the breathing is a result of probably this guy using the champion Gundia moveset. But it's fantastic how like the entire room, the chamber where you fight Lothric and Lorian, everything goes almost cold and everything becomes silent. It's like the actual magnitude of what you've actually managed to undertake has suddenly come home, and without real much warning, you are almost at journey's end as we know it. I mean, providing that you went into like the DLC before you faced the Lord of Cinder is one thing, and it's not something the game discourages you for doing the DLC before you get to the ending, and they do this sort of same thing in Bloodborne. And well, I wish there was like more things. One of the best things about Dark Souls 3 is that it is such a more streamlined storied game, because Dark Souls 1 and 2 have always kind of had a bit of a problem, is that when you get to the late game or when you defeat bosses that can be killed last, it doesn't really feel climactic, or the struggle doesn't really feel as tough. When you get to the end of Dark Souls 3, or at least when you get to fighting things like Osiris, the Nameless King, the Dragon Slayer armor, and then finally Lothric and Lorian, you are approaching journey's end, and it pulls the sort of divine intervention that probably needs to. It's to enhance the scale of what you are undertaking, and finally, it's what happens afterwards. But really, this is like the Lothric and Lorian fight as well, and it's going to be hard to like really put this into words when if you've never played Dark Souls 3, but if you do, it's almost one of those bosses that I wish I could fight it over and over and over again, because the experience is just so good. And I don't even pretend to hide that fact. It is one of the best fights in the game, and probably in the best in the series, because this is basically journey's end, and you've spent your entire game practically either wandering around the outskirts of Lothric or trying everything to get into the castle. And here we are. It's not too much. It's not too different in the sense of Vendrick, but you're fighting against a mere shell. You are fighting the full thing. You are fighting an actual Lord of Cinder in this game, and that is just the icing on the cake. It's not even like comparable to Gwyn either, because Gwyn was just the first Lord of Cinder. This is the real deal. This is generations of flames being kindled and unkindled and passed on through multiple different hands, and here we are. It's hard being at the top, isn't it? And with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this reaction to the Lothric and Lorian OST from Dark Souls 3. and I cannot wait to talk to you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.